Maya Reyes had ridden the 415 route down 5th and Halsted every weekday for 11 months, and in all that time, the driver had never once been late. He was a quiet man, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-30s, with the kind of face that seemed built for patience. The patience required to sit in traffic for 4 hours a shift, to wait an extra beat for the elderly woman with the walker, to say good morning to 80 strangers a day, and mean it every single time. His name tag read T. Calloway. Maya had never learned what the T stood for. She noticed him the way you notice weather, a constant, background presence that shaped the texture of her day without asking for attention. He always had the heat set right in winter, cracked the windows just enough in summer, kept a small supply of granola bars in the cup holder beside him that he'd hand to kids who looked like they'd skipped breakfast. Once, when a woman 3 seats behind Maya started crying quietly into her phone, he'd pulled the bus over at the next stop, walked back with a box of tissues from under his seat, and simply left them beside her without a word, then returned to driving like nothing unusual had happened. Maya worked reception at a physical therapy clinic 4 blocks from her final stop, made just enough to cover rent on a studio apartment she'd stopped decorating a year ago because there hadn't been money left over for anything that wasn't strictly necessary. The bus was the one 20 minutes of her day that felt like a small mercy, a chance to sit somewhere warm, watch the city slide by, and not think about the numbers that never quite added up at the end of the month. "Rough day?" Tobias asked her one Tuesday in October, when she'd climbed aboard looking like she'd aged 5 years since morning. "My landlord's raising rent again," Maya said, dropping into the seat behind him, the one she always took because it let her see the road ahead. "3rd time this year. I don't know how much longer I can keep up." "That's rough," he said, and something in his voice made it clear he meant it, not the reflexive sympathy of someone who'd already stopped listening by the second sentence. "You've got options, though. There's a tenants' rights clinic on Thursdays over at the library on Ashland. Free consultations. Guy who runs it helped my sister fight an illegal eviction a couple years back. You just keep all this information in your head?" "I talked to a lot of people," Tobias said, with a small shrug that suggested it was simply a fact of his life rather than anything remarkable. "You pick things up." That became the shape of their friendship over the following weeks. Small exchanges, the kind that accumulated slowly into something that felt, if not quite like closeness, then at least like the comfortable familiarity of 2 people who'd decided, without ever saying so, that they liked each other's company. Maya learned that Tobias had grown up 2 states over, that he read paperback westerns on his breaks, that he'd been driving this route for going on 6 years and had turned down 2 promotions to a supervisory desk job because he liked the actual driving too much to give it up. What she didn't know, what never once occurred to her to ask, was where he went after his shift ended, or what the rest of his life looked like once the bus pulled into the depot for the night. "You ever think about doing something else?" she asked him one evening in November, the bus mostly empty, streetlights smearing gold across the windows. "I like this well enough," Tobias said. "Keeps me around people. I'd go a little stir-crazy without that. Even with people like Mr. Hendricks?" Maya nodded toward the back, where a regular passenger was loudly complaining to no one in particular about the bus being 4 minutes behind its posted schedule. Tobias laughed, low and easy. Even with Mr. Hendricks. It was a small thing, that laugh, but Maya found herself thinking about it later that night, turning it over the way you turn over anything unexpectedly warm on a cold day. She told herself it didn't mean anything. Bus drivers didn't fall for the regulars on their route, and reception clerks with overdue electric bills didn't have room in their lives for anything as impractical as a crush. But the thought lingered anyway, quiet and stubborn, refusing to be reasoned away. Then came the Thursday everything stopped making sense. Maya had left work early, a rare half-day granted after she'd covered 3 consecutive weekend shifts without complaint, and found herself with an unfamiliar hour of free time before she needed to be anywhere. On impulse, she walked toward the small municipal airport on the edge of downtown, drawn by nothing more specific than the desire to watch planes take off, a habit left over from childhood that she indulged maybe twice a year when the weight of her life needed somewhere else to look. She was leaning against the chain-link fence near the general aviation terminal, watching a small jet taxi toward the runway, when a black car pulled up at the private hangar 50 yards away, and a man stepped out in a charcoal suit that fit him with the kind of precision that only came from a tailor, not a rack. It took Maya a full 3 seconds to recognize him. Tobias? He turned at the sound of his name, and for one unguarded moment, something flickered across his face that looked almost like panic, quickly smoothed over, but not quickly enough for Maya to miss it entirely. Maya? Hey. He glanced back toward the hangar, then toward her, clearly caught in the gap between two versions of himself that had never been meant to occupy the same space. This isn't... I can explain. You can explain why my bus driver is standing next to a private jet in a suit that costs more than my car. Maya's voice came out sharper than she intended, equal parts confusion, and the particular sting of realizing a story she thought she understood had an entire second chapter she'd never been shown. Please, I'm listening. Tobias, if that was even the right way to think of him now, ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Maya had seen 100 times on the bus, oddly grounding amid everything else that suddenly felt unfamiliar. It's a long story. I've got time, Maya said. Apparently there's a lot about you I don't know. He looked at her for a long moment, weighing something, and then gestured toward a bench near the fence, away from the hangar and the small crowd of ground crew loading luggage onto the jet behind him. Sit with me a minute. I'll tell you everything. I owe you that much at least. Maya sat, arms crossed, waiting, half-braced for a story that would explain away the last 6 years of Route 14 as some kind of elaborate joke at her expense, though she couldn't imagine what the punchline could possibly be. My name is Tobias Calloway, he began. That part's true. Everything I've told you about growing up 2 states over, my sister, the Westerns, all true. What I haven't told you is that my father built a company called Calloway Freight 30 years ago, and when he died 4 years back, I inherited it. All of it. 11,000 employees, a fleet that moves cargo across half the country, more money than I know what to do with most days. Maya stared at him. You run a freight empire, and you drive a city bus. I drive a city bus, Tobias confirmed, because for 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, nobody wants anything from me except for me to get them safely from Fifth and Halsted to wherever they're going. Nobody's angling for a board seat. Nobody's trying to marry into the company. I get to just be a guy who knows the route and keeps the heat set right. It's the only part of my week that still feels like it belongs to me. So the whole time, Maya said slowly, working through it, every conversation we've had, the tenants' rights thing, the granola bars, all of it, that was real. It just wasn't the whole picture. It was real, Tobias said, and there was something almost pleading in his voice now, the practiced calm from the driver's seat entirely gone. Maya, that's the most real part of my whole week. I wasn't lying to you. I was just not telling you the rest, because the rest changes how people look at me, and I didn't want it to change how you looked at me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The jet behind them finished its final checks, engines humming low and patient, waiting for the man who apparently owned it to finish a conversation he clearly hadn't planned on having today. Maya looked at Tobias, same face, same tired kindness in his eyes, same voice that had talked her through a landlord dispute and a bad breakup and every ordinary hard day in between, and found she couldn't reconcile the two versions of him sitting in front of her. Not yet, not with the ground still shifting under everything she thought she'd understood. I need to think, she said finally, standing, the cold October air, suddenly sharper against her skin than it had been minutes before. Maya, I'm not angry, she said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. I just need to think about what this means, about what's actually been happening on that bus for the last 6 months. She turned and walked back toward the street, leaving Tobias standing beside a fence with a private jet waiting behind him, and did not look back to see the expression on his face. Though if she had, she would have seen a man watching the one part of his ordinary life he'd fought hardest to protect walk away from him for the first time. Maya didn't take the 4:15 the next day. She told herself it was practical. She needed the walk, needed the extra 20 minutes to sort through the tangle of thoughts that had kept her awake most of the night. But the truth, underneath the practical excuse, was simpler and harder to admit. She wasn't ready to sit in that seat behind the driver's spot and look at a face she thought she knew, now carrying a weight of information that made every past conversation feel like it needed to be reread in a different light. She skipped it the day after that, too. By the third day, she'd walked the whole route on foot after her shift, past the stop where she used to board, past 3 others besides, thinking about granola bars and tissue boxes, and a man who apparently owned enough of the city's freight infrastructure to never need to work a single day of his life, and had chosen, instead, to spend part of every day driving strangers to the pharmacy and the library and their kids' schools. It didn't make sense to her, not yet. Wealthy people didn't do that. In her experience, limited as it was to what she saw on the news, in the pointed corner office glances of the surgeons who came through her clinic, in the landlords who raised her rent without a flicker of hesitation, money bought distance. It bought the ability to stop noticing people like her entirely. It didn't buy 6 years of quietly remembering which regular needed a tissue and which one needed to hear that a tenants' rights clinic existed. On the 4th evening, there was a note taped to her apartment door. It was handwritten, the paper slightly creased like it had been folded and unfolded more than once before someone worked up the nerve to leave it. Maya, I know I don't get to ask for anything after keeping this from you, but Route 14 isn't the same without you in that seat, and neither is my week. If you want answers, or you just want to yell at me, I'll be at the diner on Halsted every evening at 6 this week. No jet, no suit. Just a guy who'd like the chance to explain himself properly. Tobias She. Read it 4 times before she let herself decide anything. The diner was the kind of place that had been serving the same menu for 30 years and had no interest in changing. Vinyl booths, a coffee machine that hissed constantly, a waitress named Dot who called every customer on, regardless of age. Maya spotted Tobias in the corner booth on the second night she worked up the courage to go, wearing jeans and a plain flannel shirt, looking so entirely like himself, the self she'd known on the bus, that for a moment she almost forgot the version of him standing beside a private jet had ever existed. "You came," he said, standing halfway out of the booth before catching himself and sitting back down, unsure of the right way to greet her now. "I want to understand," Maya said, sliding into the seat across from him without preamble. "Not the money. I don't care about the money. I want to understand why you let me believe you were just a driver. For 6 months when it clearly wasn't the whole truth." Tobias wrapped both hands around a coffee mug that had gone cold, giving himself a moment before he answered. "When my father died, I inherited a company I never asked to run. I was 29. Suddenly I had 11,000 people's paychecks depending on decisions I barely felt qualified to make, and a board of directors who'd known my father for 30 years and looked at me like I was a placeholder until someone more capable came along. Every hour of my day belonged to somebody. Every relationship I had came with an agenda attached, whether the person meant it to or not. Dinner invitations that turned into investment pitches, women who got very interested in me very fast once they learned my last name. And the bus route? A friend from college drove for the transit authority, mentioned they were short-staffed on weekday routes. I got my commercial license on a whim, mostly as a joke to myself, thinking I'd drive one shift and get it out of my system. Instead, I found out that for 4 hours a day, I got to be a person nobody wanted anything from except a safe ride and maybe a kind word. I've been doing it ever since. 6 years now. My board doesn't know. Most of my own employees don't know. So I was just part of the disguise," Maya said, and heard the hurt in her own voice before she could smooth it away. "No." Tobias leaned forward, urgency breaking through the careful calm he'd been holding on to. "That's the part I need you to understand, Maya. Everything else on that route, the regulars, the granola bars, Mr. Hendricks complaining about the schedule, that was pleasant. Background noise I enjoyed. But you were never background noise. Somewhere around month 2, I started rearranging my whole day around making sure I didn't miss the 4:15, because I knew you'd be in that seat and I wanted to hear about your day, and I looked forward to it more than I looked forward to anything else on my calendar, jet included." Maya studied him, searching his face for the calculation she half expected to find, the smooth explanation of a man used to talking his way past objections, and found instead something closer to nervousness, an emotion she'd genuinely never seen on him before, not once in 6 months of watching him navigate difficult passengers and worse traffic with unshakable calm. "You could have told me," she said, "at any point. You could have just told me who you were." "And then what?" Tobias asked. Not defensively, but like it was a question he'd wrestled with himself, many times, long before this conversation. "You start treating me differently." You stopped telling me about your landlord because you're worried I'll offer to just fix it, and that makes everything between us transactional in a way it never was before. Or worse, you decide I'm not worth trusting because rich men who hide their money from women they're interested in have a well-earned reputation, and I wouldn't blame you for assuming the worst. I might have, Maya admitted. I don't know. But you didn't give me the choice to find out. You made that decision for both of us. You're right, Tobias said quietly. I did, and I'm sorry for that. I told myself I was protecting something I valued, but I see now that I was really just protecting myself from the risk of losing it, which isn't the same thing, and it isn't fair to you. The diner clattered on around them, Dot refilling coffee 2 booths over, a bell jingling as someone came in from the cold. Maya turned her own cup slowly between her hands, thinking about 6 months of ordinary Tuesdays and Thursdays that had felt, in retrospect, like the steadiest thing in a life that otherwise felt perpetually on the edge of coming apart at the seams. I don't care about the jet, she said finally. I meant that. I'm not sitting here upset because you turned out to have money. I'm upset because I thought I knew someone completely, and it turns out I only knew the parts he decided to show me. That's fair, Tobias said. So ask me anything, everything. I'll answer all of it, and this time there won't be a part I'm keeping back. So she did. Over the next hour, over refilled coffee that neither of them drank, Maya asked him everything she could think to ask. About the company, about the board that still didn't entirely trust him, about the sister who'd needed the tenants' rights clinic herself 2 years back and had inspired him to keep that particular piece of information in his head for exactly this kind of moment. She asked about his father, and watched something genuine and unguarded cross his face when he talked about the man. None of the polish she might have expected from someone raised inside a freight empire. By the time Dot came by to mention, apologetically, that the diner was closing for the night, something had shifted between them. Not fully resolved, not entirely comfortable yet, but honest in a way it hadn't been before, which felt, to Maya, like a foundation worth building on. Can I walk you home? Tobias asked, as they stepped out into the cold together. You can, Maya said. But I want to be clear about something first. I'm not interested in dating a company, or a jet, or whatever version of you shows up in a boardroom. If this is going to go anywhere, it's going to be with the guy who kept granola bars in the cup holder and remembered the tenants' rights clinic. That's the person I actually like. That's the only person I know how to be with you, Tobias said. Everything else is just what I do between 4 o'clock and the next morning. They walked the 6 blocks to her apartment mostly in silence. The comfortable kind, punctuated occasionally by small observations about the cold or the empty streets. Nothing that needed to be said so much as simply enjoyed in each other's company. At her door, Maya paused, keys in hand, and looked back at him. I'm still going to take the 4:15 tomorrow, she said, but you're buying me an actual dinner sometime this week. Somewhere that isn't the diner, and isn't your board's idea of a good restaurant either. Somewhere in between. Deal, Tobias said. And the smile that broke across his face was the same one she'd watched 100 times through the rearview mirror of a city bus. Unguarded, easy, entirely his own. No version of it borrowed from a boardroom or a corner office. I know a place. No jet required to get there. Good, Maya said, because I've had enough surprises for 1 week. She let herself inside, and Tobias stood on the sidewalk a moment longer, watching the light come on in her window. Thinking that for a man who'd spent 4 years running a company built on distance and freight and endless transactions, the thing he'd wanted most, it turned out, had been sitting quietly in the 3rd row of his bus the entire time, waiting for him to be brave enough to tell the truth.